Republicans on Capitol Hill are increasingly confident about their chances of holding a slim majority in the Senate. Right now, the GOP has 48 seats compared to Democrats' 47. There are still 5 races that haven't been called. North Carolina is too close to call this morning. Wow. In Georgia, one race is too close to call and the other is heading to a runoff. Arizona's Senate race is also too early to call, although Mark Kelly has declared victory. Alaska is also too early to call. Yesterday, Democratic Senator Gary Peters was able to hold on to a seat in Michigan. And in Maine, Republican Senator Susan Collins was declared the apparent winner of her race. Casey Hunt, what races are standing out to you? Which ones that are too close or too early are you watching, and why?
Well, I just want to take a beat. I mean, Susan Collins, people wrote her off for dead.
I know.
And, honestly, I never did. And I hope if you spin through the tape of what we've said about her on this show, she was always the one that we thought would be able to stand on her own apart from President Trump. And Joe Biden won the state of Maine, and Susan Collins carried the state for herself. So, that is remarkable. But setting that aside, we've got a couple things going on here. One, on the governing question, I mean, it's clear that this is a split decision in terms, or at least it's becoming clear, I should say. I want to be a little bit more careful since we haven't called the presidential race or the Senate. But the trend lines are emerging that we are headed for what's likely to be divided government. I mean, even if Democrats were to improbably take the Senate, it would be so narrow. This is not the sweeping victory that Democrats anticipated, a broad mandate to institute sweeping changes in policy. This is going to be a story likely about Joe Biden and Mitch McConnell and what their relationship is like. But to stick with the campaign for a second, we are watching Georgia, and I've been obsessed with Georgia for the last week of the campaign, and it's really bearing out in these 2 Senate races. We know one's going to a runoff, but all of my sources, both sides of the aisle, saying we really don't know how Georgia is going to come out here. It is so close at the presidential level. And the question is that other Senate race going to go to a runoff or not? Is one of those candidates going to get over 50%, which is what it would take? I think you could see one or the other ask for a recount to try and adjust that 50% number to try to avoid or to push the race into a runoff. So that's something to keep an eye on. But there is a possibility, if we have 2 runoffs, that the majority could be on the line in Georgia in those runoffs in the first week of January of 2020. That's going to mean millions of dollars spent. We're all going to know all the names of all the counties in Georgia. We're going to be talking about those Buckhead moms in Cobb County that Joe was focused on before Election Day. But Democrats have a lot at stake in this Perdue-Ossoff outcome in that Senate race because they need both of these seats if they want to hit 50 in the Senate. Most likely, we're still waiting for some numbers out of Alaska, but a lot on the line in Georgia, Mika.
And Casey, I'm just looking at these latest numbers out of Georgia. I mean, they're teetering. Perdue is right on that 50% line, so we'll see if he gets above 50 to avoid the runoff. But to your question about governing, let's say, for argument's sake, Joe Biden does find another state today and does get to 270. He does become the next president of the United States. Let's say, for argument's sake, you do have a Republican Senate. What do the next 4 years look like? Divided government back in Washington. Does anything get done? Mitch McConnell's already talking about a big relief package that he wants to get done before the swearing in of the next president. What does government look like in Washington the next 4 years?
Well, Willie, I think there's going to be a lot of gridlock. I mean, we have seen a lot of it's been a really challenging 4 years, incredibly partisan. Congress has tried to do big. I mean, how many times have we talked about an infrastructure package that, both sides seem to agree on, but that they can't figure out how to do because the politics have been so toxic. So I think, it's likely that dynamic is going to continue. Now, the one question that I have here, and again, Joe Biden, if we're sticking with your argument that he's in the White House, he is a senator at his core, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, he has wanted to be president his entire life, but he is a creature of the Senate. He understands how it works. He loves it. He loves the institution. He has very strong relationships. There are fewer, people that he served with now who are still serving in the Senate, but he has very strong relationships. He understands how those relationships can be applied and leveraged to actually get things done. And this is going to be very, very different from, Barack Obama did not have a good relationship with Congress for most of his administration.
No.
He forced health care through at the beginning. It was his one big achievement. And even Democrats were very frustrated with working with him. President Trump has not, he has been dealing with, obviously, Republicans in Congress who have towed the line with him, but it has not been a successful relationship. I think it could be under Joe Biden. I think the question's going to be, will progressives in the Democratic Party let Joe Biden cut the kind of deals that he might be willing to cut with a Mitch McConnell in order to actually govern?
Point.
So, that's kind of my question going into this.
So, Casey, I want to follow up on that because it's so important. Again, people right now are thinking it's the end of the world as we know it, even if Joe Biden is elected president and Mitch McConnell is running the Senate and Nancy is running the House. You are right. To his core, Joe Biden is a senator who understands it takes compromise. You have to work with people who disagree with you. It's the antithesis of the view that Donald Trump had about Congress. And Barack Obama, he may have been there for a couple of weeks. He didn't have much use for Congress. And to be really blunt, and Willie and Mika will confirm this, in the first couple of years of his administration, we heard such complaints from Democratic senators, the most powerful, that Barack Obama treated them without any respect whatsoever. George W. Bush, forget about it. That guy had no use for Congress. They treated Congress with absolute contempt as well. You go back to Bill Clinton, of course. Bill Clinton, you could impeach a guy on Tuesday.
Yeah.
He'd call you up on Wednesday and go, hey, you want to go out and golf? Bill Clinton got it.
That's a little too much.
Bill Clinton understood. There's
much.
always the next vote. Okay, you lost the last vote. The guy made you mad. The woman made you mad. We got another vote coming up this week. I got to keep that relationship going. That's what Joe Biden, if he's elected, will bring. So I agree with you, Casey. People that are saying, oh, Mitch McConnell and Joe Biden, that's going to be the worst relationship ever. It may not be perfect, but it's going to be a hell of a lot better than the relationships we've seen over the past 20 years between a White House and Congress, even if it's a bipartisan combination. Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.